What's the deal, everyone? Welcome back to the studio. I'm testing my new sand pit for Zimmer's Coffee, and in the meantime, I'm gonna go over some questions because I've done some in the field. I've got some on my phone I'll go over. Let's just go over some of these questions y'all got for me, right? All right, number one, this one's coming from Mike. All right, I love how interactive you are, Mike. Keep rocking and rolling with it. Another great video. Well, either way, you see it right up on the screen. All right, so the teleprompter I use, so actually, let me revert and say that if I was to do this all again, I would go for the Prompter People or Prompter Pal. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head. I see them advertised to me all the time. It is a much superior unit than what I use. I use this Glide gear. I'll pop it up on the screen, put it down in the descriptions below. This is my teleprompter of choice, just because when I first got it, actually my buddy Sai got it for me, gave it to me for this channel in particular. It's been extremely useful. It's very easy to travel with. But it does have a bunch of downfalls that I think the Prompter Pal or Prompter People one, whatever it's called, I've already said in the past, whichever one that is, it has a lot of cool features that this one you have to kind of rig up to do the same. Now, I'm using an old Samsung Galaxy tablet as the tablet that goes with my teleprompter. I also will use my phone. I have a few different apps depending on what I'm using. Unfortunately, my Galaxy tablet is so old that it does not support the teleprompter app that I use on my phone the most. And I'll pull that up just to make sure I give you the exact name of it. It is called Prompter Pal. Maybe it might be by the same people, right? So this is the app I choose to use. It works the best, but for my Samsung Galaxy old tablet, I think it's a Galaxy 3 or something like that, it's not supported, so I use the Parrot app. It's the one I've been using the longest. It's the one I tell agents to download because it's free and easy to use. It's the one I say to use the most because it allows them to practice. Now, you did ask about a tip I would give for using teleprompters, and that tip is making your agents script and read it out. If you watched my last video where I talk about using the G300 for a single light agent interview setup, you'll notice that a lot of my BTS, when I'm setting up, I actually have my tablet sitting off to the side and the agent is reading her script off of that time and time again. So that way she gets used to the pace. She's kind of adjusting it so it's a little faster, a little slower, so it's exactly what she wants. Now, usually I tell agents to do this ahead of time, but the problem is that once you put it on the teleprompter, it moves it further away than them just holding it in their phone and reading, which is it's kind of what they typically do. So whenever you put it on the teleprompter, it's further away and it adjusts the speed. So biggest tip is to get there early enough to set it up and let them practice for a few times before you actually run. That's my biggest tip for using a teleprompter, because most people, once you start doing it, it's very, very easy to do. And people like the fact that the camera's hidden behind all the words. It makes them feel a little more confident, especially newer agents. All right, next question. The reality is that you're correct. It is time consuming to switch between and do all of those exposures manually without some sort of automated program. Now, you could use the internal HDR processes and not send it off to an editor, but I find the results to be much better when you send them off to an editor. So it may be time consuming, but if this is all you have, then it's worth taking that extra time, in my opinion. That's why I also use the watch or the little attachment, the remote attachment, the GPS remote. There's the word I was looking for. That's why I typically use that instead, because it does make the process way quicker than trying to do it manually in the camera. And, you know, you may shake the camera or move it in the process. So I know that's not the perfect answer, but you're right. It does take a long time. All right, this one's for Max, talking about the Laowa 9mm that I use for real estate video. Once you factor in that APS-C crop, it's more like a 12mm or something like that. So think about it in that way. I do still use this lens every time I use the R4 for real estate video, which is 90% of the time that I do video. So every video that you see me do on this channel basically uses this lens. I use that lens, and then I use the 50 APS-C. Those are the two main lenses that I use. I will also, whenever I'm doing social media style videos, I put on this 35 that I'm using right now. I think it's really good focal distance for the social media videos. And then with the R7 IV, when you put it in 60 and you get that crop from 60 frames a second, it turns it more into like a traditional 50, a nifty 50. So I think those are the lenses I use the most, but the Laowa 9mm, I love it. APS-C. Now, I do have some issues with vignetting with the lens that I've talked about in the past multiple times. My DaVinci Resolve kind of build out factors that in and negates that using post-production. So that is something you're going to have to worry about. It's just the fact that it doesn't have a lot of distortion, but it does have a bit of vignetting that you're going to have to deal with in post. Next question. All right, this one's from Mark. Now, this one's dealing with the Laowa 9mm and Lightroom Classic. Now, I should say, since we just talked about the Laowa 9mm, I use it for video all the time. I almost never use it for photography, but I can tell you that when it comes to Lightroom Classic, you can easily switch it from auto, which is where it will auto detect what type of lens you have, or you can select what type of lens you have, or you can go in there and manually fix the distortion, which is what I recommend doing if you can't find the lens like you're having problems with, and then you can save that profile. So that's what I typically do. If you look at my real estate, for lack of a better term, LUTs, whatever you want to call them for Lightroom, I forget what they're called off the top of my head, but either way, if you look through those, all of those of mine actually have this perspective shift built into it. So like my 12 to 24 that I use does also have a little bit of lens distortion. Luckily it is on that list, but whenever you use something like that 9mm, again, just go in there and you can manually do it and then save that adjustment. That's going to be your best bet for any lenses that you can't find in there. Good question. So here we go. It seems like you are having some issues. Now, I'm not quite sure because I can't see which one this is. I'm going to assume it's the one on the video with the X4. You're having some issues with fringing and whatnot around the end. This can happen occasionally. Now, what's nice about the X4 and stuff like that is that it doesn't really matter what mode you shoot in on site because everything is adjustable in post using the Insta360 app afterwards. So it doesn't matter if you shoot in dewarp or in stabilized or in fisheye. It doesn't matter what mode you shoot in at all. That can all be adjusted in post-production, which is one of the things I like about the X4. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that when you're using the lens guards in particular, that's when you're going to notice the most blurring and distortion around the edges. That's why whenever I'm using mine, I take the lens guards off for doing video in particular. I leave them on for photos because you don't want it to knock over and scratch the lens, which mine has done plenty of times. But either way, I digress. I take the lens covers off when I'm doing video. And when I'm doing video, I'm also trying to point the camera straight ahead. I want the lens looking at whatever I want the viewer to look at because in post-production, I'm going to click on direction lock, which is going to reduce a whole lot of keyframing and time that you may spend afterward. You know what? I think this works pretty well. I'm just going to go ahead and cut it off because I don't think we need this rock and roll in front of us anymore. I know it works. I can't wait to go use this thing out in the field. All right. What were we talking about again? Sorry, I lost my own track of mind. All right. The other thing is the wobble. Now, keep in mind, you still have to keep this thing steady. It is still a camera. Your ninja walk is still applicable. Your very slow and steady motions are very important. If you're walking and the camera is doing this, that's going to show up. You have got to walk smooth, just as you do with every other camera, because the smoother you walk, the smoother you hold the camera, the smoother your final product's going to be. So if you're having any issues with wobble or shaking in the footage, 1000% it has to do with the way you are moving the camera on site. What I would recommend, what I usually do, I don't see it around me or I'd show you right now. If you notice in all my videos is I attach the selfie stick to the bottom. So I have a little bit of weight on the bottom of the 360 camera or the X4, and I hold it right at that point where it connects to the camera. So that way, even when the camera does move, it's moving in much slower and controlled motions than when you're just holding the camera. If you're holding the camera, and it's gonna pick up a whole lot more of that. So the first thing I would recommend is really practicing your ninja walk. Second thing I would recommend is attaching a selfie stick and making sure you're holding it so gingerly light and moving it very smooth. You don't want to be stomping your feet when you're walking. Very smooth, heel to toe motion, crouched at the hip, bent at the knees, keeping your body as parallel as possible throughout the movement. Hope that helps. All right, let's see. I think we have time for one more. All right, this one goes back to an old video of mine, tenant occupied, huh? All right, man, I haven't made this video in a hot minute. Here we go. All right, so one button to edit. I talk about this all the time. It's actually one of the few tutorials I have on my photography process. Way back in the day, I use multiple strobes on site. So the way most people do real estate photography is they bring one strobe and they take multiple pictures and then they blend all of that back in Lightroom. Well, what I do is I bring multiple lights and hide them in all of the rooms and take a single picture. So instead of having to compose all of these different lights, all of these lights are set up in the shot, so it is a one and done. Traditional MLS photography, it's the way it was done way back in the day, the way it will still continue to be done, I guess. I personally call that investment photography or investment property photography for my website, because the HDR blends or the Flambiant blends are just better. They look better on the screen, they're cleaner, they're sharper, and they're what agents want more of. So I do still offer that one touch done, especially tenant occupied properties, these real estate investment properties. These are all awesome properties to use that traditional method of extra lights. But even when I'm doing HDR images, I still do that method. I am still hiding lights all over the place. And instead of taking multiple flash brackets to send to my editing team, I take one flash bracket. They love that. As a matter of fact, I've been told multiple times by multiple editors, the way I shoot is very unique. Not only is it very unique, it's much easier for them to edit a clean product from, which is the most important thing. You want to give them the least amount of work to produce the best image for you. I saw a massive piece of spit just go towards y'all. Either way, when you are giving your editing team 12, 15, 20 houses in a day, you need to make sure the way you shoot not only works for you, but also works for the editing team. I know that's a tangent. That is not what you asked at all. Just something to keep in mind that, I shoot in a way that's much different than other people, and that typically involves me using multiple strobes on site and not just a single one to paint them all in post-production. So I hope that helps. You can go back and watch my video where I talk about that, and it'll give you a much better breakdown of how I actually do those kind of photos. All right, I think that's about it for these questions right now. I'm gonna go make myself a cup of coffee. Comment down below any other questions, comments, concerns. What'd you think about these? Do you have more questions about the questions I answered? Who knows? Keep rocking and roll. Enjoy what you're doing. Make smart business decisions, and maybe check out Zimmer's Coffee. Buy some coffee from me. Support this channel. That is the best way you can support this channel. Buy some of my delicious coffee. Peace out.